Good. All right. Okay, so let's start. Hi everyone, and welcome to another Agile Hrvatska meetup. I'm Nino Zeljko, and I'm one of the organizers in our meetup group. So just to quickly mention, I turned on the recording to make this session available for people who couldn't join us today. And we'll share it on our YouTube channel afterwards. I'll let you know about it. So today we are in a remote setup because we have Joanne Perold with us all the way from South Africa to talk about flight levels. So Joanne, thank you first of all for taking the time to come to our meetup and talk about this very interesting topic. So before we start, please tell us something about yourself.
Thanks, Nino. So I am Joanne in South Africa. I'm from Johannesburg. We were talking about how wonderful the weather was earlier. And something small about me that is interesting and other people might not know, unrelated to Agile, is that I have let me get it, a very cool magic wand it's Dumbledore's magic wand from the Fantastic Beasts. And actually, it works as a great facilitation tool when you're facilitating teams. You can use it to create focus or add a bit of magic or do some cool things. Yeah. So my
Cool.
magic wand.
I can imagine. Yeah. Where can we get one?
Yeah. I actually got mine in Cologne. There's an amazing shop in Cologne called starts with an E. And they sell all kind of wands and cool things from Star Wars and from Harry Potter and from comic books. And yes, you could get lost in there if you're a geek like me. If you're not a geek, you don't want to go. It'll be very boring. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us what are you going to talk about? And
Yeah. So today I'm going to share with you an introduction to flight levels.
mhm.
So we're going to talk a little bit about where did flight levels come from and how did it come about. And then I'm going to share with you a little bit about what is flight levels. And then we'll talk a little bit about some case studies. So we'll talk a little bit about where can you use it and why do I like it and what about it do I find helpful and appealing. And maybe I'll share a little bit, if there's time, I'll share a little bit of a case study with you where I'm currently applying it. And then we'll make some time for questions, any questions that you might ask
Okay,
at the
great.
end. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have a little less than 90 minutes. Let's reserve at least 15 minutes for Q&A at the end.
Cool.
So during your presentation, maybe people can put also questions in chat so they don't forget them, and we can revisit them at the Q&A in the end. All
Yeah.
right, great. So Joanne, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Nino. Thanks very much. I'm very excited to be here with all of you. I just want to get a quick sense. Has anyone had any experience with flight levels or heard about flight levels or done anything with flight levels? Okay, a little bit. Yours a little bit. Okay. Alrighty. Benjamin, kind of. Okay, cool. But I guess you're all curious and that's why you're here. So yeah, I'm going to share with you some of the stuff I've been doing, but also just where it comes from and why I love it so much. I'm not going to monitor the chat while I talk, but I'm very happy for everyone to put questions in there so that you don't forget. That's great. Just so you know, I'm going to come back to them at the end. If you really want to interrupt me, just stick your hand up and I will then pause. Okay. So if there's something super urgent that you want me to talk about, or maybe my accent is funny and you didn't understand something that I said, or whatever, then you can feel free to put your hand up and those I should see. Okay. And then I'll pause and figure out what's happening. Cool. Are we good to get going? Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So this is me. And there we go. So introduction to flight levels. So where did flight levels come from and how did it come about? I'm going to share a little bit of that story because it's kind of a cool story. So Siggy and Klaus, Siggy Kaltenaker and Klaus Leopold are the people that are behind the thinking around flight levels, and they were asked to come into an organization and go and have a look and see. They had been through an agile transformation and everything was theoretically awesome, but they hadn't achieved a lot of the things that they wanted to achieve, this organization, in terms of their ability to deliver. And they wanted to know what the hell was going on. So Siggy and Klaus went in and they started to have a look at what was happening. And what they discovered is where flight level comes from. So there was a company that wanted to improve, and what they were trying to improve was the time to market of projects. So that was where they wanted to go. They wanted to be proactive. They wanted to be able to exploit opportunities. And they wanted, what most companies do want these days, to be able to adapt to change fast, to be agile. So they realized, or they thought, okay, agility is what we need. We must implement or we must become agile or implement agile frameworks. And so they went off on an agile transformation journey. So they created cross-functional teams, they created product teams. The teams could choose their agile method, but they had a minimums, right? So every team needed to visualize their work. They all had to have stand-up meetings. They all had to have retrospectives, and they all needed to measure lead time and throughput, so that they could see what was happening and where they were going. They did this over a period of 1.5 years. There were about 600 people that were trained in agile mindsets and agile training. They did a reorg of the organization. Agile was implemented team by team. They had the support of 16 external coaches and 11 internal coaches. So this all happened before Siggy and Klaus got there, right? After 12 months, 80% of their teams were transformed and working in an agile way. And so they had, theoretically, it was all great. They had retrospectives, they had stand-ups, they had boards, they had metrics, they had collaboration, they had communication, they had agile teams in their organization. And so they were thinking, cool, so let's go and look at our metrics and see how we're doing in terms of what we wanted. So, we thought that what was going to happen was that teams were going to be able to slowly or quite quickly do more and then start slowly improving on how much they could deliver, right? But what was really happening is there was this initial improvement and then and it was starting to get worse and worse and worse. The throughput of teams. The same with lead times. So lead times, the expectation was that lead times were going to decrease quite a lot. But actually what was happening was that they had actually flattened out. So they had increased for a little bit, and then instead of decreasing, they had flatlined. And everyone was tired, and everyone was busy, and everyone was working. Their time to market, which was their biggest metric of what they were trying to deliver, was, instead of becoming less and less and faster, was flat. Well, at first kind of increased, then stabilized a little, but was actually getting longer and longer and longer, gradually longer and longer and longer. And so they were really worried. What the hell is happening here? And that's why they asked Siggy and Klaus to come and say, hey, come and see what's going on. We've got this agile transformation and we're supposed to be better, but we're not. Why aren't we better? Why are we worse? So what do you think causes some of these problems, maybe? Anyone want to take a stab?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in.
Yeah.
Maybe focusing only on the time to market part where product teams are involved, but time to market is a much bigger picture, right? So from the initiative to something is available for the customers to use.
End to end is always further than you think, in the words of Kent Beck. Yes, indeed. I think that that's definitely a thing. And so let us go and discover what else they found. So they started looking around, and one of the first things that they did was to go look at how teams were working together and how teams were interacting between teams. and they discovered a lot of this in the organization. So even when you reorganize and you create cross-functional teams, often you can't get away from all the dependencies. And so they discovered, there were a lot of dependencies. So team 1 was sending work to team 2, and then team 2 would do it, and then it would come back to team 1, or sometimes it would then go on to team 3, and then have to go all the way back to team 1. So there was a lot of inter-team dependencies, and there was still multiple teams working on a product. If you've got big products, sometimes you've got multiple teams working on a single product. And so the products aren't completely independent. And so there was a lot of overlap and a lot of dependencies. This is an example of an organization that I had a look at in terms of thinking about their dependencies. What could dependencies look like, and how much flight levels help you to unscramble what is going on. So this is an example of something that it could look like based on some of the slides we've seen. So performance of an organization is never the sum of the parts, right? It's all about the interactions. And so when we don't focus on how we interact, and we don't focus on the interactions between the teams sometimes, then we can often get quite stuck. And so the agility of the organization is similar, right? So to speak to the point that Vedran was making earlier, end-to-end is further than we think, right? And so organizational agility isn't about having agility at a team level. It's about having agility at an organizational level. And that real agility becomes what is happening between teams and within bigger product groups. So they had gone from something like this, where, there were lots of people that were assigned to project teams and kind of working together, to something like this, where there were cross-functional teams everywhere and they were working quite well together. But does team 2 know what team 1 is doing? So they had broken down silos and created new versions of silos in slightly different ways, which I see actually happen quite often in organizations. So the first thing was that there was no agile interactions. There weren't agile ways of coordinating and interacting between teams. So then they had a look at the workflow. Each team typically had a board that looked like this, or fairly typical. But when they started to ask some questions about, okay, so when you put stuff in done, does that mean that you're done and it's live and it's integrated and everything is finished? And they found out a lot from the teams, oh, well, actually, no, we've still got to wait for integration before it can get shipped. And so then they were like, oh, okay, cool, that's very interesting. And then can you go live? No. Then, once it's integrated, we've got to go to user acceptance testing, and only then does it go. So, okay, does that go live? Yes. Okay, cool. No, we got to wait for release, because we got to batch everybody's things up together, and then we all release at the same time. So, okay, cool. And then we can go to market. Yes, we can go to market. But how often do these things happen? Well, we wait for integration once a month, and then acceptance testing, UAT, and releasing only happens quarterly, every 3 months. Okay, so what about if we go the other way, like upfront? Let's have a look at what happens when we start thinking about some of our processes. So, we've got a backlog, and then we take the work in, we develop it, and then it goes through this, waiting for integration, all of those kinds of things. Sorry, excuse me. Is that true? Well, no. First of all, there's some business processes that we need to do. Oh, okay, so what are the business processes that we need to do? And so it went, until they figured out that the end-to-end workflow was very, very convoluted. It was a lot of waiting, not always a lot of working time, and that they were waiting. Certain things were only happening monthly, quarterly, or yearly. So if they were trying to improve their time to market, there were a lot of things that were getting in their way. So it's awesome. We can create agility in the small space where we're doing the development, but if we don't create agility across the whole organization and link those teams and interactions and that work together and visualize it end to end, then we're not going to shift the big metric that we're looking for, right? The time to market metric. So they realized that if you can't see end to end and workflow end to end is causing a whole lot of the problems, then you're not going to be able to fix it. So second thing that they realized was that there was no end to end workflow. Then they started to have a look at, okay, well, if one of the things that we're trying to do is get to market earlier, what are we trying to get to market with? Our strategy or just random projects, or where are we trying to go to market with? Faster. And so they wanted to have a look at, well, what does the strategic portfolio look like? So they had a look at the typical team board, and one of the amazing things about it, a lot of the teams, was they had work in process limits, right? Which are great, because work in process limits create focus, and focus gives us many amazing things. So focus gives us lower switching and overhead, lower cycle time and delays, all of those amazing things that we know about as agilists. And so all of that is really, really cool. But the problem is, if we're creating focus on a team level, then that's where we're going to get focus. So you need to focus on the work items that you're trying to deliver, or where you can find the biggest benefit to your customer, right? So if we are trying to ship initiatives faster, we need to focus on initiatives, not on task level, right? So if our time to market isn't going to shift, if we're just shipping tasks faster. I have a great story where I worked with an organization, and the one team was incredibly busy, and they had a lot of tasks, and they had low lead times for their tasks. They'd get stuff done really quickly, but they just weren't getting anything done. And when I dug in a little bit, I realized that, they're all doing these tasks, but none of these tasks align to each other. None of these tasks actually belong together. They're all just disparate tasks for things that that other people don't know about or aren't related to each other in any way. So, if we want to create focus, we need to create focus either at an initiative level or an epic level, if that's what we want to ship. So we need to kind of think about our value creation and focus our value creation and optimize what interests the customer or whatever it is that we're trying to do, as opposed to on a lower level. So that was part of having a look at the strategic portfolio. And the second thing was that they wanted to understand, okay, cool. So how do they map things to strategy? Like, do they come up with strategy and then come up with the initiatives for the strategy and then deliver on those initiatives? Not so much. So there was a lot of work on stuff. Strategy is announced, work on stuff, map all the stuff to the strategy, PPTX. Yay. Alrighty. And so there was a lot of trying to figure out how the work that we've already done and committed to actually aligns with our strategy, instead of starting with our strategic objectives and deciding what are the outcomes or initiatives that are going to move the needle on those strategic objectives. So there wasn't an agile strategic portfolio. That was the other thing that was missing. And then they had a look at the change process, and they were like, okay, cool. So how does this change process work? How have they reorganized and restructured this organization? And how are they continuing to create change and foster change within the organization? So they had their initial situation, which we've spoken about already. They wanted to move the needle or change how they wanted to improve their time to market. So they decided that they wanted to become agile. And so they created this kind of tick box. Well, we need to reorganize. We need to hire scrum masters. We need to send everybody on training. We need to adopt agile scrum meetings or agile meetings. We need to have the right metrics. We need cross-functional teams. We need product owners. You know, they had the whole checklist. So they kind of did all of those things. But as a lot of you probably know, implementing agile methods can't be the reason, right? Can't be, and it's not going to necessarily be the solution either. What we really need to do is we need to focus on the individual problems that the business needs to solve instead of just trying to implement the things that they think are going to get them to the solutions. So they had the current state, then they had their transformation plan, which was going to get them to the desired state. And so that's great. But if our desired state is agile, what we really need is to adopt an agile transformation plan, right? So we need to be agile in how we work with organization and how we create change. And so instead of taking our org chart and just creating a new version without understanding how the work works currently isn't going to be helpful, right? So there was no agile change process. That was the other reason that they figured out. So no agile interactions, no end-to-end flow, no agile strategic portfolio, and no agile change process. And so they said, okay, well, hang on a second. Let's look at what can we do to start thinking about and fixing some of these issues. So what did they do? So the first thing that they did was they established some agile interactions. They started to understand where are the teams working together in products and how many products have they got. And then they created interactions that married those products. So interactions where each product could work together, and then any interactions that were required where there was dependencies between the products. So slightly different. And they didn't restructure the organization when they did this. They just created visibility of the three products and interactions that aligned across those three products. Then they started looking for places where they had missed things. So, oh, hang on a second. We need Maria for this thing. Oh, okay, we need an interaction where these people can talk to each other about this work. And what does that interaction look like? So they created product stand-ups and product retrospectives. So product stand-ups to give status and updates and understanding of where we are and what coordination needs to happen. And then product retrospectives, so they could start looking for ways to improve how they coordinate and interact with each other. So then the next thing that they did was they established an operational portfolio to help with the interdependencies between products. So how can we visualize the whole portfolio of what everybody's working on so we can understand and prioritize accordingly? So they created an operational portfolio board and created visibility of all the work. And then they started to look at, okay, cool, what's happening between the teams? What are the dependencies between each of these products? So they added portfolio stand-ups across the portfolio again, so they could talk about coordination, talk about what needs to happen and status, and then project portfolio retrospectives so that they could understand, okay, how can they improve overall? Then they started looking at, okay, what does end-to-end flow look like? What does end-to-end flow look like for this whole group? So what are all the things that need to happen in order for us to deliver? And where are the wait times? So a big part of the things that they wanted to try to understand was these kind of, what are the things that happen monthly, quarterly, or yearly? What are the fixed timeframes that might be getting in their way, as well as what are the wait times where people are just waiting, and they can potentially eliminate some waste. So first of all, they had already simplified the upstream. So they created focus around the products and the way that products were being developed. And then they started to bring the business on board. Okay, cool. So who do we need from the business? How can they start to interact and add things? And how can they get rid of or make the feedback loops more frequent for the wait times. So they changed the waiting for approval to bi-weekly instead of quarterly. So they created some agile interactions. So they created stand-ups that included the business stakeholders and retrospectives that included the business stakeholders. They added 2 extra interactions with different people so that they could, with a different purpose, but using the same visualization. So then they started looking at, oh, okay, well, let's think about how we can connect what we're busy with to our strategic portfolio so we can make sure that we're going in the right direction. So they had a look at kind of how they wanted to execute on their strategy. So they had long-term business goals. This is where we want to be in 3 to 5 years or whatever the case may be. Then they had some short-term goals, but they wanted to be able to refine, because these days the world changes, and so sometimes you need to be able to refine your strategy based on what's happened in the last year, what's happening, what you've delivered, new budget constraints, global market trends, or any number of weird and strange things that happen to us these days that mean that we need to be able to adapt a whole lot faster to whatever's going on. And then we also want to make sure that whatever the outcomes are that we are measuring, we can then plug them back in and use that information to keep our strategy on track, or to modify, or to refine and learn. So they created a strategy board. They had some long-term direction. They took those and they created, based on the long-term high level, where are we going? They created some midterm measurable outcomes and some short-term. So this is where we want to be in a year or 2 years or 3 years, whatever it is. This is the kind of midterm horizon, so a year and a half, and this is the short-term horizon, a year to 6 months, whatever those things were. And then some actions, okay? If we deliver on these things, we expect the needle to move on these short-term outcomes. And if we deliver on these short-term outcomes, we expect the needle to start moving on these midterm, and so it goes. So they created a way to visualize these, and then they kind of just created it as a board. So what are our long-term, midterm, how can we visualize kind of a percentage, and how can we understand, well, what are we busy with versus what's unstarted yet? And then they formalized that a little bit more, and hey presto, they created their portfolio. Then those actions in flight became the items that were on the product boards as well. They started to link the strategy board to the product boards. So they created stand-ups for the strategic level and retrospectives for the strategic level. So stand-ups to look at where are we and what's happening, and then retrospectives so that they could start to think about how do we want to be better and what do we want to improve on. And then they had a look at the change process. So, okay, if we're going to change the organization, then we need an agile change process, right? So we want to start thinking about what is it that we want to achieve. So we don't want to do things for the sake of doing things. So we don't want to implement agile methods or flight levels or whatever it is just for the sake of it. We want to solve a problem. So what are we really trying to achieve? And for them, it was, we want to speed up time to market, right? We want to speed up time to market, and we want to be able to shift and adjust our strategy based on what's happening. Then you want to focus on the operational structure before you change the organizational structure. So a lot of the time, people create the new organizational structure based on a model that they might have seen or a model that might work, but without first understanding actually how work flows within the organization. And so sometimes if you can create focus or visualize how work is flowing within your organization, if you go back to that messy picture that I showed you earlier on, it gives you a rough idea of all the different ways that work might be flowing within an organization. And starting there can help you to figure out, okay, hang on a second, if this is the way that work is moving in our organization, maybe this is the kind of thing that we want to do or test out from an organizational structure perspective. And then we want to make sure that, and as coaches, I'm sure you've got experience in this, when the people that you're working with don't own the change or aren't part of the change, then that change, it's very difficult to create change in an organization. And so what's so important is to make sure that whoever we're working with, or however we're working to make things different in an organization, that we're working with the people that are going to be part of the change. And so, you know, creating and making them active stakeholders is so important. And one of the ways that can be helpful is to have a change team, and then to, you know, think about change in iteration. How are we changing the organization, and what are the iterations look like? So these are all the things that input into flight levels. And so what is flight levels, which is a great question, and I'm so glad you asked. So flight levels already exist in all organizations, right? We do things on different levels. There's strategy happening at in all organizations. There's coordination that's already happening in organizations. Sometimes it's just not super effective, or it can be improved upon. And there's also execution or delivery or operational work that's happening in all organizations. So the flight levels already exist. And so a flight levels model is a way to uncover what those flight levels are, where they are, visualize them effectively, and then use them to find out where in your organization you have to do what so you can achieve your goals. And so there's 5 activities that are very critical, which happen on 3 levels, and you need to do all 5 activities on all 3 levels in order to have the most benefit, but you don't have to do them on all levels if you don't want to. You just, it's like anything, you can choose. And then the one of the kind of amazing things that flight levels thinking brings is this notion of a systems architecture as a way of trying to understand actually what does the system of work look like, so that we can optimize how work flows across that system, and use that as a way to, first of all, visualize where work is moving, understand how we want to make improvements, and go from there. So yeah, so that's what flight level. So let's kind of dive in. So first of all, we've got flight level 1, and the analogy of flight levels is around airplanes, right? So it's not a hierarchical model at all. It's not meant to be a hierarchical model. It's about these different layers and different planning horizons, right? So when you fly low to the ground, when you're flying in a helicopter, for example, or a small plane, you're often flying a whole lot lower to the ground. And when you're low to the ground, you can see a lot of detail. Okay. And so flight level 1 is about the detail. It's about operational work and delivery work at kind of a task and, I don't know, feature level, that kind of thing, whatever the work items that you work with are called. So that's the first one, flight level 1. Then flight level 2 is about coordinating. Now this is tricky because sometimes you need to coordinate 2 teams and they become a product, or 5 teams and they become a product. But then sometimes you've got multiple products as part of an operational portfolio. And so coordination can happen almost nested, or at different levels, or at different layers. Alrighty. And flight level 2 is all about coordination. So it's about coordination and end-to-end portfolio. And so at flight level 2, you're flying a little bit higher, right? And so your planning horizons are a little bit longer, but you can see a little bit further, but you don't have as much detail. So now you're planning things like epics or initiatives, or things that require multiple teams to do, or maybe features depending on the context. And so that's flight level 2. And then flight level 3 is your strategic level. So flight level 3 is your strategic level, and that's where you visualize your strategy. So when you're flying super high, you can see really, really far, but you can't see any of the detail. And so that's what flight level 3 is about. So we're looking at the planning horizon of 3 years, 6 months, this year. That's what we want to see there. And then, you know, so our OKRs or whatever strategy work we're using lives at a flight level 3. and then we visualize it and break it down into smaller pieces at flight level 2, so that we know where it's going and who needs to do what and how we can work, how it needs to work. And then, that work ends up with teams who are going to execute on it and deliver it. And so we've got different ways of visualizing the work, but we need to do different things at all of those, or we need to do the same things at all of those different levels, and sometimes with different people, but not hierarchically different people, just because different people might care about different parts or be able or need to make decisions at different layers. So what are the 5 activities? What do we need to be able to do? So first of all, visualizing the situation. We can't change or understand the system if we can't see the system, right? So visualizing the situation is what gives us visibility of how the work flows, where the work flows, and what it looks like. And so that's what we want to do first, create visibility of the situation at hand. And so we need to do that at a team level, at flight level 1 sometimes, and then we need to do it at flight level 2, definitely, because that's going to help us to understand where the gaps are, where the coordination really needs to take place. And then at flight level 3, so that we can visualize and understand how what we're delivering on flight level 2 and flight level 1 is having an impact on the goals and the measures and the outcomes that we set out to get as part of our strategy. So here's some ways that you can visualize the situation. This is one example of a flight level 2 system. This is another example of a flight level 2 system. We're in October. What are we going to do? What's done? What we're going to do now? What we're going to do in December? What we're going to do later? And then the second thing we want to do is create focus. So we all know that creating focus is what allows flow, right? So when we create focus, we can have flow, and when we have great flow, then we can start getting things like great predictability and shorter lead times. But until we have the focus, we can't get there, right? So creating focus is really important, but we need to remember that we need to create focus at the level that we're trying to impact. So creating focus at a team level is going to be a smaller lever, and creating focus at a strategy level is going to be the biggest lever. So, for example, what I notice in lots of organizations is that if you've got 3 strategic outcomes or 3 strategic goals or OKRs or whatever it is, those will often become 10 or 15 things at a coordination level, and those 15 things become 20 or 50 things at a team level to do, right? And so, the more things that we're trying to achieve at a strategic level, the more that's going to cascade down. And so the more things the teams are going to end up with doing. So if we create focus at a strategic level, we're far more likely to get the stuff done faster. So how can we create focus? Well, we can have WIP limits, we can create time boxes, the way Scrum creates focus, sequencing, start policies, and anything else we can think of, as long as we're creating focus in some way. So what we want to do is also shift behavior, right? So starting work costs us money, but finishing work delivers value. So we want to start focusing on delivery as opposed to starting things. And we want to focus on optimizing finishing work rather than having busy people. So those are also the principles that we're kind of looking at. So the next thing we want to do is we want to establish agile interactions. So agile interactions are thinking about, okay, cool, what are the things that we need to do at all of these different levels? So each level, we probably need to have, there's some kind of planning that we're going to need to have at a strategy level, right? And then we're going to need to plan slightly differently and more frequently at a coordination level. And then we're going to need to plan again differently and more frequently at a team level. So planning at a strategy level might happen once a year, and planning at a coordination level might happen once a month, and planning or once every 3 weeks or something like that, or once every quarter or something like that. And then planning at a team level might happen every 2 weeks, right? And so we've got these different planning horizons and potentially different audiences. And then we need to improve those things. We need to have quick check-ins. We need to understand the work, get shared understanding of the work, refine what's coming, those kinds of things, right? And make improvements to how we're doing. So yeah, so figuring out where the dependencies are and what needs to be planned. And then bringing people closer so that we can be more effective about deciding, okay, cool, when are we going to do this stuff, or who do we need in order to deliver on the stuff? And then, like anything, we need to measure progress, right? So we need to decide, what are we going to measure and what's important to measure. So DORA metrics are good, lead time and throughput metrics are good, but measuring progress is hopefully very, very closely aligned to, why did we start to do this in the first place? What is the goal that we're trying to achieve, so that we know that we're getting there? So for me, measuring progress happens on different levels. It's the measuring progress towards the goal that we're trying to achieve, but it's also about measuring progress towards our strategic objectives and making sure that we're closing that loop. These are the objectives. These were the things that we wanted to do. For every piece of work or every initiative that we finish, are we moving the needle somehow on that? Yeah. So if we measure time to market, if we're trying to change time to market, we need to measure time to market. And then we want to improve, right? So we want to improve what we're doing. We want to figure out what's not working for us, and we want to go from there. So 5 activities: visualize the situation, create focus, establish agile interactions, measure progress, and improve. And we need to do these 5 activities on all 3 of those different levels, flight levels, right, in order to help us. So we want to do it on all 3 if we want organizational or business agility, and not just at a team level. And what I'm discovering is that, the agile interactions are a huge, they're the key, to figuring out, okay, cool, where is work getting stuck? What do we need to unstick? Who needs to talk to who when? Because either people are having scrum meetings or they're having project meetings, but sometimes they're not thinking about, okay, well, how does the work flow and who needs to talk to who when, actually. Yeah. So that's it. Flight levels, 3 levels, 5 interactions, but systems architecture. Okay, we need to think about, what does the system look like, because that's going to give us a way to help us to think about where we might start. Alrighty. So earlier I showed you that really messy picture with all of those lines. That is a group of about 435 people or so. They're doing the group IT work for a larger financial services organization, and they have these kind of siloed groups that they're working in, but they actually all need each other in order to get work done. And so what I did there was just had conversations with the leadership, just try to get a rough understanding, starting with organizational structure, to understand how their work moves. Because I needed to start to try to understand, what were the coordination systems that were going to make sense? Where could I start that was going to have the biggest impact for the lowest change costs, basically? And that's where flight level systems architecture comes in. It's a way of helping us to understand, what does our system look like? Where is the work currently, and how does it flow through the organization currently, so that we can start to understand, where do we want to create coordination systems, how many coordination systems there might need to be, and what those coordination systems look like. And then we can figure out where to start. So a flight level systems architecture is an amazing way to think about those things. So what you don't want to do is, you don't want to just map your org chart, right? Because often what I started with on that picture, and I'll go back there in a second to give you a sense of what it looked like, was I started with the org chart, right? So I had all the boxes with the org chart and all the kind of groups. And then I said, okay, cool. So how do you work? Where does your work? Who else do you need in order to get stuff done? Was kind of the conversation that I had. And all of a sudden, instead of, needing only the people in their kind of local streams or close to them, it was all over the show. And so now we can get a sense of, okay, the operational structure and the organizational structure are two very, very different things. And so we don't want to map the organizational structure, because then we're just creating more rigid silos. What we really want to do is we want to understand the operational structure and how it works and how work is actually flowing, so that that's what we can visualize. And that's where flight level 2 systems are so, so, so powerful, and where the systems architecture part comes in. So this is an example of a systems architecture for a online car selling platform, is the words I'm looking for in Germany. Online car selling platform. So you can see that they had a look at, okay, cool. They started with flight level 1. What are all the possible flight level 1 systems that we have? So in the core experience space, there were 12 teams. In the customer space, there were 4 teams. In the business intelligence space, there were 2 teams. In the dealer space, there were 6 teams. And in the private seller space, there were 2 teams. Alrighty, amongst the OEM and some of the others, there might have been but there weren't a lot of smaller teams. So then they were thinking about, okay, cool, well, how might we need to coordinate work? Well, if there's 12 teams working on core experience, we probably need to coordinate the work of those 12 teams with each other at some level, right? So we might need a flight level 2 system there at core experience. The same with customer and the same with business intelligence. But then when it came to the dealer, they realized that, oh, hang on a second, the dealer teams also work with the OEM team and the private seller team. And so maybe we need something different to happen over there. So originally they started with 3 separate flight level systems, but quite quickly they realized, oh, hang on a second, it might actually be better to create a single flight level 2 system to coordinate those 3 groups, because they work together so often and so frequently. And then we probably need a big operational portfolio to coordinate all of the dependencies between these teams, because it's not like core experience is never going to have to work with the customer people or never have work that moves between these. And so this is just an example of one way of visualizing a flight level systems architecture, so that you can start to have a look at where are your possible flight level systems, flight level 2 systems. But you don't have to build them all, right? You can just start with, for example, an operational portfolio and the dealer, because that's going to give you the biggest impact for the least amount of change. That's kind of that's what I'm always looking for. What's going to give me the biggest impact for the lowest change costs, because there's always a cost to changing things, right? Then the second thing is thinking about flight route. So once you've kind of had a look at what your systems architecture might look like, then you want to start to think about, okay, what are the flight routes in this organization? How does work actually move? So how does work move between the strategic level, the coordination level, and this execution level between different teams? And so sometimes, we start with a strategic outcome, and then that strategic outcome, gets visualized at a flight level 2, and that's great. So we just copy it over, and then we have to think about, oh, hang on a second. In order for us to do this, what are the initiatives that we're going to do? So either there's a canvas, or there's some initiatives, or there's some, whatever it is, work changes and gets broken up and moves in different ways. And so flight routes help us to understand, okay, where is work moving in our organization? How is it moving? And who needs to be involved? So the cool thing about thinking about flight routes is that flight routes can also help start identifying and unpacking some of your agile interactions. So every time we see something that's going to copy, we're probably going to have a decision interaction that needs to take place, right? So we need to prioritize and decide that we're actually going to start actioning this thing. And every time we see something that generates something else, we probably need to have a planning or an unpacking session, right? Interaction. So, you know, and then we can start to think about, okay, well, who do we need? If this is on the dealer board, then we need dealer people. Do we need these teams? Do we need these people? What do we need? So flight routes really, really help to identify and to think about how does work move through the organization and what work types do they become, which is actually a lot harder than you think it is, because just getting shared understanding of work types in a large organization is actually quite insane, because everyone's got the same word and it means 10 different things. If there's 10 people, if there's 40 people, I discovered it means 40 different things that can take a really long time to get shared understanding. So yeah. So helping us identify how work flows can then also help us to think about what are the coordination systems we need. So you want to use your systems architecture or work systems topology and the flight routes together as a way of understanding how does work flow or how does work move within your organization or within the part of the organization that you're trying to do something with or improve upon, so that then you can start thinking about, okay, cool, what are the flight level 2 systems that make sense? Cool. So where do you find out more about flight levels? I'm so glad you asked that question. That is a very good question to ask. Here, so there is Rethinking Agile, which is a very awesome book that Klaus wrote, that is available on Audible, Leanpub, or Amazon. Then there are some workshops that you can do. So there's a flight level 2D workshop, which is all about how to design and create flight level 2 systems. There's a flight level 3D workshop, which is all about designing and creating flight level 3 systems. Then there's a flight level systems architecture workshop, which is all about how to get the most out of creating, visualizing, understanding, thinking about, and using flight level systems architecture to think about stuff. And then there's a flight level change leadership workshop, which is really about creating, thinking about how to manage the change. So, you know, anything that you do where you're creating new things in an organization is about change management. So that is where you can find out more on flight level. And there is most recently the newest book that Tiggy and Klaus have written on flight levels. Well, this is the English version. The German version came out a little while ago. So if your German is better, then go the German version. But if your German is bad like mine, then the English version just came out. With hopefully more languages to follow. So yeah. So that is how you can find out about flight level. But before you disappear, I wanted to just share a tiny little bit of a case study with you, if that is okay, and if people still had energy for that. We can do a little test. How's everyone doing? I feel like I've been saying a lot of things. Okay, cool. Alrighty. Okay, cool. Let me just check the questions in the chat.
I'm looking at the chat. No question.
Oh, okay. Alrighty, cool. Okay, so let me go with this quickly. Alrighty. And then share again. So there we go. Okay, cool. So this is, there we go. So this is an organization, like I said. So this is the group IT of a large financial services organization. They run a federated model with all their business units. kind of able to do their own thing, but with the centralized IT, big IT kinds of things. And I just started working with them. And so one of the first things I did was just try to get an understanding of how does their work. And so this was basically the organizational structure of this part of the organization. And I mapped it out and then just had some conversations with people. So did some talking and some drawing, getting an understanding of how their work works, because I knew that in order to help them, the biggest thing that they needed to fix was their coordination between their teams. So the way that they're currently coordinating within their own group IT space in order to get projects done, not working very well at all. And it's taken them a really long time to get anything done. So that was the big problem we were trying to solve, or we still are. We were busy working on it. Yeah, so after talking to the leaders of each of these kind of smaller groups, we realized that this is what their world looked like, which is kind of cool, right? Does this look familiar to anybody else? What was lovely was this was messy, but it was just so real. This is what their world looked like, right? This is how their work works. This is how often they need each other. This is how many of their teams need to work together in order to deliver anything. And the minimum is 3 teams. 3 teams amongst this is minimum to get anything shipped. So that requires a lot of coordination. And so how I used this was I used this as a way to think about, okay, what's going to be the first thing that we can do, or have the biggest, what's the biggest lever for the smallest change? So we decided, okay, what we need to do is right in the middle here, we need to create a key projects portfolio that just focuses on key projects, because we couldn't fix everything at once. This is like business as usual operations. Some of the operational work, they have like up to 800 items a week or something like that. I was like, wow, that's a lot. There's a lot going on. So we just wanted to focus on the key projects. So that's where we were busy when we're working with a smaller group of leaders, and we're creating the visualization of the key projects and the agile interactions that go with it. So yeah, so one of their problems was basically this was their world, but at scale. I took a stab at creating a little bit of a work systems topology for a systems architecture to start thinking about where are possible coordination systems. But actually, we decided to start with this whole group portfolio only for key projects. And then what we did was we looked at what are some of the flight routes. So we looked at their strategic projects, and so how did they come in? What was the trigger? It started at a strategy level, and so then it needed some level of coordination on the key projects level, and it became milestones, and then those milestones became deliverables, and then those deliverables, but possibly also needed coordination because they were going to be delivered by multiple teams. So now we're getting an understanding of, okay, how does the flight routes work, and how can we use that information in a way to help us think about things. So we unpacked a few different flight routes, but we were really focusing on the strategic project one. But they had some other initiatives. They have different words for kind of the same thing. And then BAU requests, what do they look like? Where they only need coordination amongst kind of 1 or 2 teams. And then a pattern where sometimes an initiative will become a strategic outcome at a later stage. All of these things helped us to think about and understand, well, how does their work, and what are some of the things that we can do to just unpack this complexity and make it a little bit easier. So yeah, so at the moment we're busy with the key projects portfolio. We're about at the place where we're going to start discussing organization. Yeah, so this isn't a fictitious organization. This is a real organization.
Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, we have a question in the chat. And I have a question also.
Yes.
So I was wondering about if you could share a little bit more about what those lines mean in your first slide in your
Ah,
study. But let's go first to Mladen's question, okay?
yes, yes, yes.
So,
Can I recall my experience of a company that more or less succeeded in realizing the value of flight levels for them and in moving on with it, and so reached certain improvements to an extent where you would say, okay, we faced these 3 to 5 biggest impediments at all levels, and this is how we resolved or managed them and moved on to some valuable improvement, or didn't because you couldn't move through or around the barrier. Sure. That's a lot of stuff there. So I've been working with this organization in 3 different areas for about a year now, I think. The first place that I started, I worked with an area of the business that I've actually done work with before, and they were already organized in kind of an interesting way. And so with them, all I did was help them to visualize their coordination. They had product value streams. They had already organized themselves into product value streams. And we just created flight level 2 systems that could help them to coordinate the work between the different value streams. Some of the things that are tricky is always, well, not always, it's often the case in organizations, is where you've got shared people. So, for example, the marketing team in that space was shared between all of these different areas, all of these different product streams. And once they had kind of figured out how to deliver, they were delivering really fast, and their marketing and their learning teams their training teams couldn't keep up with them, actually, which was very interesting. So IT and tech weren't any of the problems anymore, but marketing couldn't keep up with the delivery. And that was very interesting. And so that was one of the issues that we faced. With 2 others, I think it's different every time because you're doing slightly different things. So one of the things that I'm struggling with at the moment is the one group I'm working with. We've got a change team, and we've got great change initiatives, and people are part of the transformation and care about what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, and that's really great. And so it's easy to do things with them. And on the other side, the change team has kind of died, and I'm trying to kind of breathe some life into it again. And a lot of they're very busy, and so getting the people to just commit their time to start building flight level 2 systems is hard, because that's one of the principles, is that you want to build flight level systems with the people, not for the people. So to answer your question about the impediments, one of the first mistakes I made was I built, or the project manager, actually, she likes to just get stuff done, or program manager. So she built this amazing flight level 2 system for the people that were going to use it. And the adoption was slow and not great. And it was only after we revisited it with the people that were going to use it that it started to get adopted. So that is a very, very big and important thing, is that you really have to involve the people. You need to build it for them, because they need to think about what are the interactions that make sense for them, what are the problems that they're trying to solve. Yeah, so there's some tips. I don't know if that vaguely, that because there was so much in your question.
yeah, Mladen says, get it. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay,
All
great. Great. So Josip has a question. Can you share a few tips of flight level 2 design, in particular their correlation with value streams? Optional. Did you have experience where flight level
Yes.
2 group needed to support from supporting teams like finance, HR, and so on?
Yes. So Yusuf, that's couple of things in there. So flight level 2 systems are interesting because sometimes there's a lot of people that needs to be involved in operating the flight level 2 system, right? And you can't always have all of them in the design, because maybe you're going to have 200 people part of the system. You're visualizing the work of like 200 people, and you don't want to have 200 people as in the design. So what you need to do is I made the mistake of starting with a group that was just too big. So you need like 20 volunteers to start with. So start with a smaller group for whatever as a representation. Make sure that they're a good cross representation. I find that kind of the senior leadership has a kind of an idea of some of the things, but actually it's your middle management that's got a really good idea of what the real problems are. And so having some of them as well as some of the people on the ground as part of the creating the system is helpful. And then what you need to do is you need to build something and then get buy-in from everyone else. So you need to do this kind of mix of building and sharing and building and sharing and building until you've got this kind of buy-in. And then and then you want to be very clear about what are the agile interactions you need. Because then it's helpful. So I've not necessarily HR, but finance and compliance and risk and compliance and legal and marketing, and they're often shared people across. And so they need to be part of that like organizational portfolio usually that kind of visualizes end to end, because often what happens is that they end up being the bottleneck. When when your tech people can start to deliver and you create focus, then it's legal, it's compliance, it's those guys that are not able to keep up because there's like one of them. And so then you have to start thinking about, okay, how do we bring you in sooner? What are the interactions? And so I help the learning and development guys, sorry, I'm talking too much, come up with a way to plug themselves back into the other flight level 2 system in a way that made sense for them, so that they could stop being the bottleneck. Yeah.
Well, just a little bit of context. So currently in my company, I've implemented, well, let's say flight levels as much as they can be implemented. I think it's a really small company for, we're not using the whole free flight levels, or better to say I've merged flight level 3 and flight level 2 in a way, because it's a small company.
Yes.
So it doesn't make sense kind of just to create two separate boards, because we're coordinating on one strategic board.
Yes,
so that
makes
was my
sense.
first learning when I started just raising the middle level board, so to speak. And what I found is exactly what you said. I think what you said is that it's necessary to incorporate those people from marketing, from compliance, from finance into flight level 2 coordination groups. And yeah, I found exactly what you said. There are bottlenecks and they need to be included as a group. And maybe to add on that, if we're building a group that's kind of built around one value stream or one flight level 2 board, what is your experience? How homogeneous this group is? How long does it exist? Because as you said, it's usually one. They're scattered around the finance, the marketing. It's not a lot of them. It's not so easy to get by. Not a full-time person, but at least 20% for them to coordinate something. So, what is your experience?
So it's something that I haven't got loads of experience with, but I'm playing around a little bit with, and I'm starting to get some ideas. Because, for example, the one group that I'm working with, I can see the opportunity that they need for more cross-functional teams within the group IT, but I also think that they don't need to make all cross-functional teams. And that sometimes those teams aren't going to necessarily be super long lived. They're going to be like for a quarter or for a planning horizon or something like that. So what I'm thinking is maybe those teams need to exist sometimes for an initiative or a outcome or a strategic outcome, and sometimes for like as long as possible. But I think I don't think there's one right answer. I think that it's starting to think about, okay, what are the interactions where all of these people need to be part of versus what are the interactions where we only need some of them, and then who do we need? Yeah, because I'm starting to notice that as well. Like, here's the interactions where we need everybody, here's the interactions where we just need these people, here's the interactions where we need them to kind of listen and give input, but not necessarily, yeah. So
You've answered my question fully, so yeah, thank you.
cool.
Good to hear that. Yeah.
Great.
Cool.
Good to hear that I'm on the right track, at least.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing some really cool things. I also, I think one of the other things I'm learning is that you can get rid of some flight level 1 systems by having great flight level 2 systems that sometimes visualize both things at the same time
You're
as well,
reading
right?
You're reading my mind, because just to elaborate why,
Yes.
I found that so as we're a small company, then they say, let's say marketing says, oh, we're flight level 1, so we have our board. That's our board. We don't need to kind of collaborate, or there's still silos between the teams. And I tried with partial success to kind of create, the flight level 2 board in a way that I didn't connect flight level 3 and 2, but 2 and 1. And marketing, HR had to work on one particular initiative, marketing, HR, and couple of developers. And this enhanced the delivery rates, or, well, project was successful. So you're reading my mind. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Experimenting is the key.
Yes, exactly. Because the other thing that I'm starting to think about is like, what actually do you need to visualize where, and do you need to visualize everything? Because I used to think you need to visualize everything, but I'm starting to realize that everything can sometimes get too messy and overwhelming for people. And so it's also about like, what do we need to visualize so that we can have the right conversations about the work and the right amounts of coordination. Yeah. So that's the other thing that's super interesting. So not necessarily everything, but I don't know. I don't have answers yet. I'm exploring options.
So I have a connecting question to Josip.
Yes.
What I often hear in bigger companies, like, well, how many people do we need for this, level? We're a big company. There are many stakeholders, and product owners. Should the team members be involved, and so on. So how can we make this work? We need like 50 people for this. What would you say to that question?
Yeah. So 50 people are kind of already doing the work. So you're doing is you're going to start with a subset of those 50 people, smaller group to get going, because 50 is going to be too many. But then you're hopefully going to understand where those 50 people need to talk about what and when in a better way than they're doing it at the moment. So what you want to do is, instead of adding new interactions into their current system, you want to understand what are the things they're already doing that you can repurpose or change in a way that's going to enable them to do work smarter or have better conversations or include the right people from the agile interactions. But you might need all 50 people to start off with to, ultimately you're going to make the work of those 50 people better.
Okay, thanks.
Or faster.
And we have a question from Milica. She says, like, on which level is the hardest to implement activity?
Yeah, so for me, flight level 2 is the most complicated. So flight level 1 is easy, and often organizations get that right straight away. Like teams have got boards and they're working and they're getting stuff done, and it's great. And then flight level 3 is fairly straightforward because there's so many different ways you can visualize strategy. But it's just strategy, and it's at a high level, right? So you don't have a lot of stuff on there. There's not a lot happening. I mean, there's lots of awesome things you can visualize, but there's not necessarily lots of moving parts, right? But flight level 2 is where the rubber hits the road, because there's so many different things that can influence where you might want to start, or why you might want to start in that place, or who you might want to involve. And the size of the organization can make that complexity like just crazy. It can get, you saw the picture that I showed you, that's a proper mess, right? Yeah, and that's just one portion of this organization. I work with 2 other divisions, and I'm thinking of, well, how do we connect? And they get stuck because group IT needs them, or they need group IT to do work together all the time. And so they're getting stuck all the time in that place. So once I've helped these guys solve their immediate problem, then I want to move to helping them work better with the rest of the organization at flight level 2. So yeah, so flight level 2 is definitely the hardest, but also the kind of the biggest opportunity. Well, I don't know, I think linking work to strategy is the biggest opportunity, but flight level 2 can be a very big lever to pull, yeah, to create cool things.
So what you're
Yeah.
saying basically is flight levels is a recipe you take and just implement in-house and you're done.
Definitely.
Just
So
kidding.
quick on that note, like what do I really love about flight levels? So what I really love about flight levels is that it's very pragmatic. Okay. So there are no, like, it doesn't matter what the organization is doing, or how big or how small it is, or how or whether they're a product organization or so, it doesn't matter. You can use flight levels to help them create visibility and operate better, which is what's so cool. But the other thing that I love is that's what's inherently built into the thinking around flight levels, is that you have to, first of all, make sure that you're solving some, why are we doing this? Like, focus on the problems we're trying to solve. Oh, these teams aren't coordinating their work effectively, or we're not connecting our strategy to our delivery, or whatever, or we've got too many dependencies and we don't know how to organize our work effectively, or whatever. There's some reason why we're doing the thing, and then we're using the best critical thinking and problem solving of the individuals within the organization to help them solve their own problems. So you're not going in there to tell them how to do it, you're getting them to tell you how they want to do it. So you're bringing your flight levels expertise maybe, but they're bringing their organizational context, organizational expertise, and their critical thinking, and that's kind of critical to the process. So cool.
Cool. And I have one more question for you. So if I'm interested in the topic, and I want to, experiment and start, what would you say? What would you recommend? How can I start experimenting with that in my company?
That is a very, very good question to ask. So if you want to start experimenting with it in your company, I would recommend doing I think if you've already got good Kanban knowledge and you've already kind of played around with portfolio systems, then I would recommend that flight level systems architecture is a great place to start, so that you can really kind of learn about how to leverage the systems architecture. Because otherwise you run the risk of putting together a portfolio that's nice, but isn't actually looking at it's not having a big impact across the organization because you started in the wrong place. won't be a train smash, but it you know, it just means that you're not kind of you're not getting the biggest impact for the smallest change that you can. So I would start with flight level systems architecture as getting more information. Yeah, there's lots of people that are doing lots of talks and all of those kinds of things to help out. Yeah, either that or starting at flight level 1 and just getting your teams kind of going.
Okay. Well, hopefully we are already there, but
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
I don't see any more questions in the chat. Does anybody have a question for Joanne before we wrap it up? Joanne?
One more question.
Go ahead.
So what tools we live in mostly now remote workplace. So what tools do you recommend or do not recommend for implementation? What impediments do you see when using them? I've found that it's really difficult to find one that supports kind of flat levels. Not even out of the box, but to tune it to support it.
Yes, yes. So, at Flight Levels Day, one of the tools people was showing what they've done in support of flight levels, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been Kanbanize, those guys.
Oh,
But
okay.
mostly what I'm doing is I try to stay agnostic about the tools, because a lot of the organizations I work with use Jira, and I'm not a fan. But I don't want to dissuade them from like figuring out how to make it work for them if that's the tool that they're going to use. So I love Miro because Miro can give you so much visibility, and it's got a Jira plugin, so that's kind of awesome. And then you sometimes can get the best of both worlds. Yeah. So Miro is awesome and it's what I've been using at the moment. But yeah, I think for me the important thing is that you're always going to have trade-offs. So no matter what tool you choose, you're going to have trade-offs about what you can visualize and how you can visualize it. So what I'm trying to get people to focus on is, like, if you can do everything, start there, and then start super simple, like with sticky notes on a Miro board, until you've figured out, like, before you go and, customize your Jira and then you can't change it, or it's hard to change, or it takes a long time, or those kinds of things. Yeah. So, but
simplicity.
I think, yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Simplicity is the biggest thing. And then the other thing that I've also realized is that, like, the interactions can be the thing that that can, if you've got a not so great tool, if you've got great agile interactions, then it can balance it out, kind of thing. But if you've got a great tool, if you've got crap interactions, then still not. Yeah.
I loved when you said Kanbanize, because that's what we also use.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, I think it was them. I'll try to think. Go look on the Flight Levels Day stuff and see if I can send it to you. But it might be
Thank you.
Kanbanize. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Cool. 1 minute until the end of the time box. So, Joanne, anything you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, so if you want some information about where you can go get courses or whatever, if you get in touch with Nino, he's got the Better Change list of courses. Otherwise, Flight Levels Academy, if I'm allowed to say that, those two things. Okay, cool. So those are great places to start looking for where you can learn more, and yeah. And then I've got a little bit of a PDF that I'll send with some more information to Nino, and yeah, he will.
Yeah. Thanks, Joanne. Yeah, so I will make the recording available on YouTube probably tomorrow or the day after. I'll let the community know, and also the PDF from Joanne with a couple of important information. So thank you very much, Joanne, for taking the time coming here to talk to us about flight levels. It was great. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And thanks to all of you who joined. And we'll see each other at the next meetup.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was really nice to be here, and thanks for having me. Yep, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, that's cool. And if you've got any more questions, just get in touch.
You'll put your info in the PDF, right? So people can reach you.
Yes, I
Oh,
will. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Joanne
Thank
and Nina,
you.
for organizing.
bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.